Well, Jim, we could spend some time talking about this area of spiritual warfare. I know you've thought a lot about that, and you've fought battles yourself. So could we start out and tell us, Jim, what are some of the different aspects of spiritual warfare?
Yes, the first act of creation mentioned in the Bible is a creation of angels, and it's mentioned about angels are mentioned about 247 times in the Bible. And Psalm 148 just said God spoke, and they were created. And the Bible indicates that the number has never increased or decreased, and that there's so many that can't be counted. But only 4 have names, and those are Gabriel, Michael, Satan. So I'm sure the others have names, but those are the ones that are given. Now, most scholars believe that the accounts in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 are referring to Satan. And the account in Ezekiel 28 points out that Satan was the most brilliant and beautiful creature that God ever made. That's quite a thought, you know. And he says that you're the most brilliant and beautiful. Well, Isaiah 14 tells about how his ego got out of control, and he said, I'm going to build my throne above the throne of God. And he ended up by saying, I will be like the Most High. There are indications in Ezekiel 28 that he ruled the universe, and his throne was on the earth in a place called Eden, which was a mineral kingdom, not a biological. So, riding pretty high. But after he rebelled, maybe took a third of the angels with him, in Luke 10:17, many people think Jesus was talking about Jesus. Jesus talking about Satan when he said, I saw Satan like lightning fall from heaven. So he was cast out. Well, right now, God, the earth may have wandered around in space for millions of years. And according to Jude chapter verse 6, it was not in the gravitational field of any other celestial place. It wandered around in darkness for I don't know how long. And apparently Genesis says that God was grieved over this place that he made, and it was so beautiful that all the angels sang with joy in the past. But here it is, wandering around in space, in darkness, covered with water. So God said, let's restore it and put a new tenant on it. So Genesis tells how God restored the earth. Now there's a difference of opinion among creationists that many think God created the world in 6 days in Genesis. The Hebrew word for created is bara, B-A-R-A, and it says to make out of nothing. And then after Genesis 1:1, the Hebrew word is for assemble, that God assembled the parts already here. So I think there's evidence that of a very ancient earth, which was restored to habitability in the 4 opening chapters of Genesis. Well, Satan, wherever he was, saw what was going on. Adam and Eve took over, and he was jealous And he said, I'm going to get it back. So he come in, and his strategy was to conquer Adam and Eve. In international law, it's not that popular, but international law does recognize the right of possession as a result of occupation. The Europeans come and took land away from the Indians. We don't have a moral right for that, I don't think, and that was all over the world, you know. So apparently God recognized Satan's ownership once that he had gotten Adam and Eve on his side. But after that transition took place, I think one of the most important verses in the early part of the Bible is Genesis 3:15, that God spoke to Satan, and he said, I'm going to put enmity between you and your seed and the seed of woman. Now it's interesting that biologically the seed of reproduction is in the male, not the female. So he reveals the virgin birth of Christ. You know, right in the beginning. It's got to be between you and the seed of woman, which was Christ. Then the biggest battle that's ever being fought in history, we know the outcome. Because God told Satan, you're going to bruise his heel, but he's going to bruise your head. And people that read that verse point out, you know, a heel bruise is not fatal, but a head bruise is. So we know who the winner is from the beginning. But the scenario that's being played out in today's age is the battle between Satan and the seed of woman, Christ, for the eternal souls of men. So that's where the warfare starts out. Now there's a lot of information in the Bible about things Satan does, that he counterfeits and he lies and slanders God, you know, a lot of that. But the basic apparently drive that he has is to get people to be loyal to him instead of being loyal to Christ. He wants to win over on his side. And of course Christ is counteracting that all the time. Now just to jump several stages we could go in. One method that Satan used is to set up strongholds that he can control. Everything goes on. And it's my opinion, this is strictly my opinion, that there are 5 great strongholds. And the first is the education system of the world. That children do not have to be taught not to believe, rather. They have to be taught not to believe. I heard about a mother that was trying to explain daylight saving time to her son. And the son said, has anybody asked God about this? You know, it makes perfect sense to them that God created the earth, he's in charge of running it, and then people come along and try to change their mind. So that's a stronghold. I think the second strongest stronghold of influence is the entertainment industry. And then probably the third is the media. And I think maybe the fourth might be the lukewarm church. And then if I were going to add a fifth, it would be the government. That decides you don't pray and things like that. So that's what Satan is after. Now it's interesting to me that in our own, well, all military systems, the theories used in pursuing war are all biblical. They're copied from spiritual warfare. In all our war colleges, the senior officers are taught such things as, why do we go to war? Why do we fight? Well, the answer is, we have a political problem that can't be solved by diplomacy. They go to war. What is the objective of war? The objective is to cause the enemy to abandon his will and submit to yours. That's all about. What is the technique for doing that? The technique is the destruction of the enemy's main force. Now, military strategists have a lot of fun. And you don't win a war by bombing supply lines or the only technique that will win a war is when you destroy their main force. Lincoln had trouble. He couldn't get any of his generals that wanted to attack the Confederate Army. They wanted to capture real estate. But capturing real estate doesn't win a war. So when General Marshall wrote out the orders for General Eisenhower, his job in Europe, less than a paragraph. And the heart of it was, you, in cooperation with the Allies, are to land on the continent of Europe, seek out and destroy the German army. So Eisenhower never did have to go to bed at night. I see, what am I here for? And somebody said, what are we supposed to do? Well, one thing, just seek out and destroy the German army. So that's what they did. Well, biblically, this is the way spiritual warfare is waged. I want to give a couple of illustrations. The first is in Acts 16. Remember, Paul was having a good ministry, headed toward Asia. And things were going great. And then God told him to turn around by the other direction, into Philippi. And 3 times, God said, turn around. And the last time, he used his friend Luke, who built up Philippi a little bit. He's probably his hometown. He bragged on a little bit. So Paul, Silas, and Timothy turned away from a very fruitful ministry and went to Philippi. So I think Paul thought, this is going to be great. And he looked around for what God was going to do, and all he could find was an unsaved women's prayer meeting. So he joined this unsaved women's prayer meeting down there, and go out and meet him every day. And on his way, there were a couple of local citizens that had a demon-possessed girl that could tell fortunes, and so it made a lot of money. So every day when Paul and Silas and I think maybe Timothy was staying at the YMCA, and he didn't go with him every day. But this demon-possessed girl would stop, point her hand at him, and say to the crowd, these men are the servants of the Most High God that show us the way of salvation. Isn't that wonderful? Everybody give a cheer. So Paul and Silas would bow their heads, and kind of embarrassed, go on, do their thing. Well, I think Paul got desperate after several days of this. Now, he did have some luck. Some of the women became believers in that. But he, I'm imagining this now, that he told God, I'm really disappointed at this turn of events. I thought you had something greater in mind than this. And so God said to him, Paul, you're a pretty good preacher. You've been doing a lot of good preaching. You're a good prayer. You've been doing some praying. Now, I want you to live it for a little while. So for the next 24 hours, don't make any decision without checking in with me. So Paul said, okay, we'll do it. So the next day, when they passed by the demon-possessed woman, she gave the same old thing, you know, hey, there's these wonderful people that show us the way of salvation. And Paul, I think, probably put his hand over his head, you know, embarrassed as usual. And God, what do you want me to do? He said, cast out the demon. Mm. So you've been avoiding this all these days. So Paul did. And immediately, the owners saw their means of livelihood was gone. They made a living, weren't telling a fortune. Mm. So they stirred up the crowd, threw them in jail. Mm. Well, Silas, they were both Roman citizens, and the job of a Roman governor was to collect taxes, prevent civil disobedience, and to see that Roman citizens' rights were respected. I think that was part of their job description. So Silas said to Paul, tell them we're Romans. They can't throw us in jail, you know. And Paul asked God, he said, well, tell them we're Romans. And God said, no. And so he didn't tell him, you know. So they threw him in. And you remember they didn't give any supper, and they beat him up, put their hands and feet in the stocks. And at midnight, the scripture says that they sang hymns. I heard a teacher teaching on this once, and he said if that had been Paul and me, instead of Paul and Silas, Paul would have sung a solo in that. But the minute the vibration of their voices hit heaven, God turned it around, turned it into a seismic wave, and knocked the whole town for a loop. Now, houses weren't very sturdy, and they were lighted by candles and fireplaces. So, set the whole city on fire. Well, in that day, people, when there was a disaster like that, earthquake, they thought the gods were angry, and they'd done something, made the gods angry. So they said, now what are the gods angry about like this? And so some of them said, well, it's those knuckleheads at City Hall. They took these guys, you know, threw in prison, abused them, and so the gods were getting punishment to them. So the city council had a meeting and said, hey, we got a problem on our hands here. Let's go and ask them to leave town, you know, no charges of any kind. Well, of course, in the meantime, after the earthquake, all the cells came open and all the prisoners escaped. So the jailer was the meanest man in town, I think. And he saw that his life, if he let the prisoner escape, he'd be killed. So he saved the Roman government at the expense of a trial, picked out a knife or a sword, sort of fall on, committed suicide. And Paul saw him and he said, do yourself no harm. We're all here. So the jailer said, stop, you know. Then he took him and fed him, washed their wounds, and then Paul led him and his whole family to Christ in their home before daylight. Well, then the representatives from the city council showed up and said, Paul, we're sorry for what happened. You can leave town. And so God said, now tell them. So they said, who'd beaten us on a trial. Now, we're Roman citizens. And I think if Paul wanted to be rough, he would have added, if I report this, you're not going to lose your job, but you lose your head or this. And he said, we'll leave when we get ready. So they stuck around a few more days in that. Well, jumping ahead a few centuries, or a few weeks, the Philippi congregation was very special to Paul, probably his favorite congregation. And I think every time they had a testimony meeting, the first guy that jumped up was the jailer. And he said, when Paul said to me, don't do yourself any harm, we're all here. And he said the compassion in his voice was just irresistible. You know, and he gave his testimony over and over again. Well, he was the meanest man in town. And the most influential man in town. So God's strategy in Philippi was to enter the stronghold and start there. I was talking to a director of a summer training program, the Navigators once, and I told him about this. And I said, did you think about this strategy on the campus? And he didn't. Hadn't. A few months later, we met again. He came up to me, shook hands, and he said, I think we found him. And I said, you'll have to refresh my memory here. And he said, don't you remember our conversation? Yeah, I remember. He said, we found the key man on IU. And he said he was a Jewish student. He controlled all the drug traffic and the gambling, all the rackets, you know. He's probably the best known man on campus there. And he got caught up in jail. And while I was in jail, he became a Christian. So my friend told me, he said, I think we found him, you know. I'm not just sure what came of it, but when the meanest man in town becomes a Christian, why, that's God's strategy. You know, attack the stronghold and get the meanest man in town. Now, Samson, his life is not an example, but God's purpose was accomplished in him because God wanted to destroy the Philistines' main force. That was the political and the military leadership. So God maneuvered them all under one roof. And then Simon pulled the supports down on the arena, and over 3,000 of them were killed. There wasn't a whimper of resistance after the Philistines actually went out of business at that point. And Samson became the prime minister, and they could do what they wanted because the main force had been destroyed. Now the way that applies today, I think it's still God's strategy. And I met with staff from several campuses a few weeks ago on a training program. And when I sit down with them, you know, I'm kind of a spy from headquarters. They generally want a little bit of affirmation, you know. So I always get asked, what do you think about the ministry, you know, on our campuses? And I said to this group, by the way, your girl was in that meeting, you know, here from Iowa State, when I met with the staff. What was her name? From Iowa State was in that meeting in Jacksonville.
Alyssa?
I don't remember, but I said, well, I don't know about that much about your ministry. what's your 25-year plan for the campus?
Yeah, that.
And what do you mean? I said, well, you're like most navigators. You're hung up on guerrilla warfare. And you think you knock off a few students as they pass by the campus, why you've accomplished something. I said, the students are not the enemy's main force on the campus. Satan's main force is the faculty and administration. And you should begin, as the Lord allows you, to career certain students to be professors and administrators on the campus. So 25 years from now, it will be insiders on the and then faculty administration that control the ministry on the campuses there. And most have never heard of a 25-year plan. Well, one of the best books been written on guerrilla warfare is Che Guevara, who now is the ruler of Cuba. He's Castro's half-brother. And it's the best books I say I've read on guerrilla warfare. And he said the purpose of guerrilla warfare is to topple the establishment and set up your own government. You're just out there to kill a few guerrillas out there in the bush, you know, that doesn't affect the thing. Now, there's moves in Hollywood. A lot of Christians out there, but nobody has the courage to really do something. But Jim Kennedy, a while back, started a move out there. The movie Ben-Hur got more Academy Awards than any movie in history, before or after. And it's a wholesome, Bible-based movie, you know. Well, people go for that. But the people that produce, they think they go for violence and sex and all that kind of stuff. So, the infiltrators. The governor of Texas, you know, he just recently led a day of prayer down in Texas. And he got such a good response that he decided to run for president. Because that was a good theme, you know, that really put him ahead. People rally around a guy like that. It might do some good politically, you know, in that. So, you have to infiltrate, take over. Now, I tell those students, you don't have to be in the majority. But University of Colorado is a very liberal university. Our rep up there years ago, Gene Trogue, always got a job as a dorm supervisor and took classes just to be in touch with the students. So one day he was in a class and the professor said something that Dean took issue with. And so the professor said, "You sound to me like one of those people that believe the Bible." And so Dean said, "Yes, I do believe the Bible." And so the professor said, "No respectable intellectual believes the Bible." And it happened that the head of the psychology and philosophy departments were both outstanding Christians.
Wow.
So Dean said, "Are you telling me that Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so are not respected intellectuals?" "Oh, no, that's not what I said at all. You totally misunderstood me." And he looked for a table to crawl under in that, you know. Well, what I feel on the campus, if you have professors, Christian professors, of equal intellectual stature as non-Christians, the student says, both these guys can't be right. I've got to decide which one of them is right. So you just got to have enough there to make a difference in that so they get exposed to it. So what's the government, entertainment, you know, need to get infiltrated.
Mm-hmm.
Danny Thomas, you know, was pretty famous, a comedian. And all the actors called him Deacon, you know. Well, he wouldn't compromise on anything, you know. Don't think he, not sure he's a real believer or not, but he's a very moral person. And Pat Boone, and a bunch of those people. Also Bob Hope, I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but he had the same wife all of his life, you know, he never got married or divorced. Andy Griffith, I saw him on a program. He wrote some songs like Power in the Blood, sang for Christmas a couple of years ago. Saw those guys, but they don't represent the main theme of it.
Mm-hmm.
I made my first trip to Johannesburg, South Africa several years ago, and I just kind of wondered with all the turmoil what was going on. So they don't turn the TV on till night down there. So when the TV came on, I turned it on. And here were my friends, the churches, Peter and Ida Church, reading the Bible, leading in prayer. So they open the TV program with Bible reading and prayer. They close it with Bible reading and prayer. The leading newspaper in Johannesburg has a verse of scripture in the banner above the headline every day in that. Now, I don't know what sincerity is there, but that sets an atmosphere in that. So that's the way we counteract. See, you know, you talk about on a tactical level, there's lots of things, but in the big picture, it seems to me that's what we need to be aware of. I was, Anna and Marianne and I were reviewing Matthew 12, was it 49 today, where Jesus said, doesn't seem like a real moral illustration, but he said, if you want to rob a man, you got to first bind the strong man before you rob his house. So that's the same thing. I said, if you want to win, you know, you've got to go after the enemy's main force. Now, I also feel that God has unlimited strength and resources. Satan doesn't. So after Jesus resisted him, it said he departed for a season because he knew he was losing every argument. So he got out of there for a while. I think we need to be very careful in our reference to the devil. He has two limitations. This is in 1 Kings chapter 8 and Psalm 44. Make a point that God only knows the secrets of the heart. I might have mentioned this earlier, but aboard ship, we found out if we talked about the people we were going to witness to, we go looking for them and Satan hit them. He doesn't understand, he can't read our minds. He doesn't know our strategy until he hears it from us. So we learn, never mention your battle plan except in prayer. So the first time he hears about it, if he's listening on prayer, and then against him, you know, from the beginning there. But as powerful as Michael is, you know, he and Michael and Satan, according to the book of Jude, got in a contest over the body of Moses. I don't know what it was about. But Michael said, the Lord rebuke you. You know, as powerful as Michael is, he wouldn't take on Satan by himself. So I find that one of the most helpful things to me is always address him as Christ's defeated foe.
Mm.
Never talk about him, except as a loser. Every time he contests what Christ is about. Now, a final thing, let us throw this around a little bit. What is his strategy? Well, since he doesn't have a future, he really doesn't have one. So his total occupation is opposing what Jesus is up to. Every time you plan something for God, he'll oppose it. Raise up the opposition. Whole life just opposing. So part of my prayer life is that Satan will restrain him so he can't interfere with what God wants to do. There's a lot else, I think, in the Bible on tactics of spiritual warfare, but the big picture is Jim Peterson. I mentioned him. You know, he in São Paulo, Brazil, where he worked for a while. There are 10,000 Spiritist congregations in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So Jim, he'd attend their meetings, and I never did go with him one of them. But they, in the meeting, they kind of line up like you're playing leapfrog, you know, and the Spirit will move from one of them to another. And you see him quiver and jump, then he goes into the next one. So when Jim would show up, just to learn what he could down there, you know, they almost become inactive, you know. Why did you come here to this? And just his presence seemed to stifle the activity in that, you know. So just a token opposition to what he's doing seems to work. Oh, Jim's got a lot of good stories about casting out demons and healing people and stuff like that. And everything. Yeah. So I think my conclusion is we don't have to be losers in the spiritual warfare. And I'm thinking about the best thing for us to do is to infiltrate every stronghold and take control of it. So while we kid around a little bit, you know, just throwing out a little general thoughts on this.
Oh, that's good. Brian and I were talking, and possibly there are two extremes in the way people carry out day by day living in this warfare. And one extreme might be to just basically you pray once in the morning and live the day and go to bed at night, and anything that happens, it's obviously God's will because he's in control of the universe. And God created Satan. Satan is limited. I'm fine. The other possible extreme might be someone that maybe every 5 minutes claims the blood of Christ and sincerely believes that they have to call upon the powers and they have to be putting on the armor. There's truth on both sides. How, Jim, how can we live this out without possibly losing the good of our general Jesus Christ as he leads us into battle?
I think it's a consciousness that anything you're going to try to do for God, he will oppose. And you just constantly pray, you know, that, oh God, we're about to undertake this. Don't let him mess it up. Give a couple of illustrations that when the gospel started being broadcast by radio, they didn't know about taping, so everything was live. And Charles E. Fuller, who had a U.S. 9 at Wentworth, would go into cities. Well, they were in Muscatine, Iowa, and the auditorium had a tin roof. And just before they go on the air, a rainstorm came up on that tin roof, and you couldn't hear a thing, you know. So, and what we were going to do, you know, the clock was ticking to open up the broadcast. And so about a minute before, you know, he just got up in front of them and prayed, "Now, Lord, we pray that you'll stop the rain so that we can get on with this broadcast." So he said, Charles Fuller said, the minute I prayed that, Satan said, "What if he doesn't?" And Fuller said, "Get out of here." One of the most famous pictures of Martin Luther is they had inkstands in those days, you know, red. It's this red thing on the wall where he threw the inkstand on the wall. And so what happened, Satan was pestering him. He picked up the inkstand in there. So I think it's awareness, you know, that you go on a trip and you're trying to mess it up. You know, just pray again for his. Well, in the Old Testament, it uses the expression build a hedge. So any activity I'm involved in, I pray that God will build a hedge so he can't get through to mess it up. Because I know that's what he's trying to do. So I don't know whether that's being overly conscious or not. But, you know, a woman tries to take her baby in church, and the baby will cry. And I'm acquainted with some young mothers, and, you know, they're hard up for sleep, you know. Well, the devil pinches the baby during the night to wear them out so they can't have a quiet time, you know, in that. So that's what I feel, you know, we constantly just pray that God will safeguard this activity because we know it's his nature. Try to foul it up and interfere with it.
I think sometimes we as men deal with discouragement. You think that's one of Satan's big tools is discouragement, and how do you counter that?
Well, I heard a story about that Satan was concerned about losing so many followers, and he called a meeting of all the demons, you know, and said, "We got to do something about this." And so he took all the suggestions, and one demon said, "Well, why don't we go perch on every Christian's shoulder, and anytime anything adverse happens, we'll whisper in his ear, discouraging it, and kind of discouraging." So they tried this for a few months, come back, and it was a great success, you know, in there. But there was one demon that he looked very unhappy. And the devil asked him, "What's your problem?" He said, "Every time I told this guy, it's discouraging." He said, "No, Romans 8:28, all things work to do good." So no matter what I said, he came back with a verse of scripture on it. And he said, "No, I'm discouraged." So Dawson Trotman, the phrase on this to be, discourage the discourager.
Good.
You know where the promptings come from. Just trying to discourage you, discourage the discourager.
Jim, in Zimbabwe, there are traditions in burying elders. And there's a very strong value system in honoring the spirits of all the elders, and that people, the citizens, have a responsibility to do what's right. And then if there's a burial, it can be like a two-part burial. And at some parts of the ceremonies, there's a calling upon spirits, and some of our Christian friends have seen some obvious demonization going on. And on one hand, they want to honor their family. They don't believe in the spirit of the ancestors the way the unbelieving family members might. So, but they still want to honor that family member, and yet there's demonic activity. How do we, in any situation, how do we encourage young people in terms of when do you flee from spiritual activity that might be very unhealthy, and when do you stand and fight?
Dave Hall gave some help on that. The first time I went to Ghana, when he was a country leader, he asked me to do a weekend conference on God the Father. And I didn't know what to do about that. I never heard that before. You talk about Christ or the Holy Spirit before you have God the Father. So Dave spent his first term in Uganda until he got kicked out, down there. But when he came back on his first furlough, he took a course in anthropology. And he said he wished he'd have done that before he ever went down in the first place. Because what he learned in that is whatever country you're in, you need to discover what are the local people's strongest felt need. And he said his evaluation in Africa, it is for protection against unseen spirits. Now he said, if you present Christ first, why people annex him. They're looking for all the protection they could get. So here's another God. Okay, yeah, we take him. So what he wanted on the God the Father was that he is the power over all spirits. And then that Jesus is God. And he has power over all the spirits. So he's just not somebody you annex. So I think, and you know better than anybody else, as you read what that applies to Zimbabwe, but he felt it's protection against the unseen spirits. That's the greatest thing they're after. And they named their taxi company Jehovah is Great. Bar, the Lord is my shepherd, bar. All that to protect him. So it seems to me that would be a good place to make him see how Jesus is superior to all spirits, whether they're ancestors or demons or anybody. They're all subject to him. With the ancestral worship, I think that's a tough one. But also kind of illogical. I was in Saigon one Sunday morning with Vern Bache, our representative there. And there's a big international church, most of the missionaries go to. And I said, Vern, instead of going to church, why don't we take a tour of the city of Saigon and visit all the temples? So we spent 2 hours just driving temple to temple. And I stopped at each one of them, most of them had these delicious roast pigs, out there. Well, one of them we went to, and so have an attendant there, a guy smoking a cigarette in shorts, So they said, we've got a gift for our ancestors here. So he took out a drum and beat it, bang, 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 tell them that their friends were there. So nothing happened. So they scoop up the roast pig, you know, and take it home and have a dinner, big dinner on that. So since the ancestors don't pick up the gift, you know, well, they have a feast at home on that. So there wasn't anything reverent about any of them. And of course, they didn't make contact with their ancestors. So, but this guy, you know, beat on a drum with a cigarette in his mouth. Okay, they were looking for the ancestors, you know, in that. So it's not very logical, but it's a deep tradition and hard to combat. What I understand, one of the greatest resistances to some of the ancient religions of Christianity is if they become Christians, they've got to acknowledge that their ancestors were wrong. And they just can't do that. And that's Jewish, a lot of them too, you know. If I become a Christian, I'm acknowledging all my ancestors were on the wrong track.
And there are some simple verses. He who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. And Satan is great. But what you're saying, Jesus and the Father are far greater. And we can hide, we can flee to, we can live in that greatness.
When a fleet used to travel to foreign ports, because sailors get drunk and in trouble, they have curfew, you know, you have to be back at sunset or something like that. So Christian guys on the ships, we always put together meetings, you know, that wouldn't be the curfew. So we would ask our officers, you know, for special privilege to go ashore. So this one guy on Battleship New Mexico, he was going to put in a request to get free. And somebody said, well, do you think that, you know, God likes your prayer? And he used the verse he just used. He said, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the supply officer, which was his boss. But I don't know much about that area. It's kind of a delicate area, and it certainly isn't logical. If they had a visit from their ancestors. Of course, in the Philippines, the greatest evangelistic night of the year is Halloween night. And in their branch of religion, they, once a year, the parents, the ancestors meet with the people in the cemetery. So they bring them a big banquet, you know. And so the Christian organizations go together and bring truckloads of tracts to every cemetery entrance in Manila. And everybody comes in and gets this tract, you know, because that's where everybody comes there, you know, that night before. And they always take plenty of liquor, you know. Well, they show up, present their gifts to the answer, they don't show up, so they end up drinking the liquor. So it ends up kind of an orgy rather than a worshipful exercise there.
Yeah. Well, I wonder too, related to that, and maybe that's partly what Dave was getting at in Ghana, talking about God your Father, that to know my true identity, if I've come to Jesus Christ, one aspect of that identity is I'm a son in the family. I'm a junior son, and Jesus is my elder brother, and Father is powerful, and I'm safe in the family.
Well, I think that's a good transition, you know. You persuade them God the Father is the creator of all life. And then Jesus is God. He's not another resource against the unseen world.
Hmm. That's good. Thank you, Jim. Possibly we could talk about some things that you're learning about what the Bible teaches about being dead to sin. Would that be something we might move to?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just take a short break.
Okay.
Well, that's good, Jim. I needed to take a break, so we'll, if that's all right, we'll just stop for a minute.
24 minutes.
Well, yes, I don't need that long, but just a few minutes. Now, Roger, when we go off and on this.
My problem is that when I even touch this, there's a short, so only a few words missed not much, because I was listening to it, so anytime I move this monitor or anything, it's just, so I'm just want to keep it working today, and then maybe when we're not taping, I'll try to figure out what's,
Okay.
just so we can keep going.
And
So
if-
what your question is here, you want to know how much time we got here? Or?
I was going to ask to see what you say. Let's see, we went 56 and a half minutes. We still got 5.5 hours on that memory card. So
Okay,
we're.
so we just did 55 on here. I didn't think it didn't seem that long.
No.
I was
No.
going to say maybe half an hour.
No.
It looks like it's got 28 minutes left.
Okay.
Which, if push comes to shove and you're on a roll, I can stop and pop in a new DVD on the fly, and that thing's still rolling.
Yes. Okay. That's
So
fine
if you're
with
on a roll
me.
and you don't want to stop, it's not like we're not gonna miss something. I mean, I can still do it, and we can get the bulk of it, and not have to stop.
All right.
That's another reason for dual sources.
So Jim, would you like to give me a few clues on how you'd like me to question you regarding this?
Yeah. I think it'd be well, maybe just for you to read 6:11 and then 6:14 and say, let's talk about that, kind of mysterious.
So read Romans 6:1 through 14?
Just 6 verse 11.
Just 6 verse 11, okay.
Then 14 after that.
And then 14, okay.
King James in 14 says, sin shall not have dominion over you. And then 11, know that count yourself to be dead or reckon yourself. The
Yes.
NIV says count. King James says reckoned. Others say consider.
No, they live off Dayton Road up north of the trailer park area there.
And then what is 6:14? What's the key phrase?
Sin shall not have
Dominion.
dominion over you.
Boy, those are good verses.
Yeah, actually I see the NIV says, sin shall not be your master. King
Okay.
James said it does not have dominion.
Dominion. We don't use the word dominion much anymore. That's a good word.
I just didn't have time.
Domination.
Technical problem I need to get here and fix.
Okay.
Well, sometimes when I get down to the nitty-gritty of discussion, I say, if you win 51 times and lose 49, does that activity have dominion? Oh, we don't have to be perfect, you know,
Yes.
percentage-wise.
Yes. Well, and I may ask a question or two as it flows out of
Yeah.
the spiritual warfare, because just some of the things you were saying, it's just Satan will whisper, do it, and then I may not do it, or things don't quite work out, and he'll whisper something else, and it's easy to not count ourselves as being dead to this. I don't have to do it. Now, I still might want to, but I don't have to.
Well, and I think you ought to jump in and say, well, you need to clarify that. Just make sure we don't just jump over something. So be filled to challenge anything that's said.
Okay. And John Stott passed away, what, just in the last month?
I didn't realize that. No.
Recently, I think in the last 1 or 2 months, and a secular newscaster, and I can't remember the name, with one of the U.S. channels, gave a very honoring overview of his life, because he felt like John Stott was such a well-balanced evangelical. And this man really respected Stott, although he didn't agree with all the theology, but that's very recent. Yeah. Okay. Give me a couple minutes, and I'll be right back. And we will jump in.
I will be interested to know what use is made of these, because I really don't see where that great, the paper, has got all the stuff in there. So,
Well, this morning I had some time at work, so I Googled your name, Navigators, and I found a page chock full of MP3s and of just a lot of things you have taught. And some had the text. I think it was the Navigators webpage, where just many resources from you. I did find one video produced by the Navigators on YouTube, where it was very short. You explained how you were led to the Lord by Dawson Trotman. And you told a real simple story about you went to play volleyball, and the police were there, and you thought you were going to get in trouble with a bunch of Christians, and then you didn't accept the Lord until about a year later. It was a pretty short story. And that's the only video I found. But we haven't got an exact plan, but what I'm thinking is YouTube, you can have your own channel, and it's really just your videos all on one page. So if somebody wants to go and scroll through and see what you've taught video on, they can look at the videos. And I don't know, we might be able to upload 15 to 20 minutes to half an hour videos, or we might be able to make them shorter. But I don't want to compromise your teaching, so we don't yet know how that's going to work out. But you could say, well, here's a link, or you could put on your website or emails, you can say, well, here's a link to a video where I taught on this, and somebody could watch it, anywhere in the world.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, because it shouldn't go to waste if anybody's interested.
No. And, no, you're right. I don't want it to go to waste. But now we have kind of a plan for, at least we're producing the materials to where it's in a DVD format, and it's also in a digital format inside this camera. We could pop a little card into the computer and send it to YouTube right away, and do very little to it. Just what you see is what you get. So I'm sure Ron will email you and let you know, because I told Ron, this is only half of the work, or probably less than half of the work for us. We'll have much more to do once you're gone, in terms of getting the stuff onto the internet, because it'll take a little time to do. So you'll be a web sensation Your videos will go viral, as they say.
You're probably familiar with the Navigators discipleshiplibrary.org website.
I'm not.
Well, it's the big one, the Navigators. And there's probably 200 of my audio tapes.
Maybe that's what that was.
Yeah,
Because it had like 50 or 60 people's names, lots and lots and lots and lots.
That would have been the discipleshiplibrary.com, yeah.
I'd never seen that before. And I really like, when I have a good MP3 player, to put that in my ear and listen when I'm driving.
Well, Brad Ray, who runs that, is a very wealthy guy. And he'll put anything on it, that's my problem. It's not edited or selected, If it's got certain people's names on it, he will grab it and put it on there.
Wow. Yeah, that's, so that's what we'd like to do. What town in Missouri are you from? Go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just curious, what Kirksville, or what's your hometown?
Yeah, actually I was born outside of Kansas City.
Kansas City.
But my great-grandfather homesteaded northeast Missouri in 1832. And we still own that land. It's about 40 miles from Kirksville.
Okay. Because I was just thinking of another great teacher who's from Missouri, Dallas Willard. He's from Buffalo Grove, Missouri.
Oh, yeah.
And that's down south,
Yeah.
Buffalo Grove.
I think Missouri is really two states, north of the Missouri River and south. In the south you get an Ozark territory, and then north is pretty much like Iowa.
Buffalo Grove is down, it's not all the way to Branson, but it's a ways down there, Buffalo Grove.
Interestingly, that's that area, that southwest corner is where George Washington Carver was born and then saved by this white family. And I can't remember, it's a little town in that southwest corner, not too far from Oklahoma. Good people came out of Missouri.
Well, there's Highway 36 across the northern strip, and you start at Kansas City, that J.C. Penney was born there. Then the next one was Walt Disney, and then General Pershing, General Bradley, and half a dozen Dodger pitchers came out of there. So something about that chemistry along that highway.
We've got about half of these batteries left. That one session, this one burns really, it burns bad.
Amazing.
It's a battery hog.
Okay.
So I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay.
You just look the audio one last time. Okay, you good?
Ready?
Yep.
Go.
Let's go here.
Whoops, I hit the wrong one, Roger.
Did you get it?
You tell me.
As long as there's a little, yep, it's going.
Jim, as we've been interacting about Satan but the greatness of our great God in the spiritual warfare, as we talk and think about being dead to sin, how can we practically think about ourselves and then act based on the truth? And so let me read two verses out of Romans chapter 6, verse 11, and then verse 14, and this will be in NIV, and you also have it in King James. But Romans 6:11, in the same way, speaking to believers, count yourselves dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus. And then verse 14, for sin shall not be your master, because you are not under the law, but under grace. So speak to us on this issue of how are we dead to sin? What does that mean?
Great question. And we were talking earlier about John Stott. The British are pretty outspoken. And so John Stott's written a little paragraph, and he said this verse has probably been a stumbling block to more Christians than it has helped. And he said, first of all, they can't do it, and therefore they think that it's not true in the Bible. Now, first of all, he goes into what is being dead. So he said, if a mortician wants to know whether he's got a corpse or a living person on the table there, let him take a lighted cigarette and twist it out on the body. And he said that being dead is no response to external stimuli. So if there's any life there, yeah, you'll find it out. So if you just take that literally, being dead to sin, mean there is no response to external stimuli to sin. And I don't know of anybody that's ever had that experience here, So the key is the Greek word in there. I've got hours of study material on this. I don't even know how to pronounce the word, because every Greek scholar I've asked pronounced it different. But it looks like phonetically it is logos mahi, and it appears about 14 times in the Bible. The translators used a number of words, and one of them is reckon or consider. But I think I can make a case that the best English word that interprets that Greekish word is the word visualize. And I can prove that, I think. So from now on, whenever you think of that verse and word, instead of using the word reckon or count or any of those others, just say visualize yourself as being dead indeed unto sin. Now that has to have a little more modification, and I think to get the full meaning we have to interpolate a couple of words and say visualize yourself as being dead to the obligation to sin. Now, it's the obligation, not the sin itself, but you don't have to respond to sin by sinning. So if you take those two little modifications, I think the verse begins to make sense. Now to hook this up with probably the best known verse in the Bible on temptation, 1 Corinthians 10:13. The King James says that there's no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted above that you're able to bear, but will with the temptation make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. And I notice that anytime you go into a public building, you'll find a little sign that says exit in red. You don't have to go out of a public building the way you came in. There's a way out other than the way you came into it. So what God is saying, in my estimation, you can't be fenced in with sin. God is not to hold at it. And there's a way there. If you look for it, you can find it. It's there. That's a fact. Now, most of my life, the teaching has been, and the belief that, okay, when I get to the point of temptation, God will do a miracle, something to open up the exit. But what the real meaning of the verse is, visualize. Now, here's what I tell students on that. For an everyday week on the campus, you can predict with a great deal of accuracy what your routine is going to be today. And not just a student, but I don't know what the percentage is, but probably over 90% of the things you've done today, you visualized in advance. What road you were going to take, what car you were going to take. So you see yourself doing it before you do it. And the wife decides what she's going to cook, you know, and what the kids' routine is. So it's a part of our nature that we visualize everything almost that we do before we do. So my understanding of how these fit together is that in the morning you visualize your day. And generally we visualize everything except how to avoid temptation. So in my day, I don't go downtown. Well, I'm going to avoid 2 streets down there, you know. So I visualize what I'm going to do. Now, I've got a story in the paper about an alcoholic who had become a Christian. And he was going down State Street with D.L. Moody, who'd led him to Christ. So he had been a patron of all the bars on State Street, so this bar owner saw him coming and took a glass of whiskey, poured it out on the sidewalk and in the door. Well, once he got a whiff of that, you know, he couldn't resist. So he poured it, and Amos and Moody came along, and he walked right on past the door. So the barkeep came out and said, "Amos, you can't go by here without coming in and have a drink." And Amos said, "You're right. I can't. But Jesus and I can." And we did. Now I think Amos visualized, you got to go past that bar. Probably picked that out. But he saw himself going right ahead. So the word visualize is a very strong word. Now the way I approach guy students on this, you know what classes you're going to be in today. You know where the girls sit. And you know if some of them are kind of careless the way they dress and expose their bodies. Are you going to sit where you get the best view? Or are you going to sit behind them so you can't see? Well, the only way you will take a seat behind is if you see yourself ahead of time doing that. So if we have not visualized a way of escape, we're vulnerable in that. So you could add to the verse then, I think, visualize ourselves as being dead to the obligation to sin because we've picked an alternate. And visualize ourselves doing the alternate in that. Now, as far as I know, I've never heard a sermon or read a book where the people got this insight into this verse. But I think that's it. It's a key thing. You know, visualize yourself as having no obligation to respond to the temptation because of an alternate plan. So where I'm vulnerable in my Christian life is something I haven't made an alternate plan. If I get caught without a plan, I'm probably dead on that. Now I mentioned I've got a file that I call way out things. And one of them is by a retired Air Force chaplain, C.S. Lovett. And he's got several, it might be called way out chapters in it. But one, he says, whenever the imagination and the will come into conflict, the imagination always wins. And I think we talked about this at noon, that he said, don't ever visualize yourself standing on the edge of a cliff and falling over, because the imagination will supersede your will. Well, I don't like the word imagination, I use the word visualization. But if you have imagined or visualized a way of action, it will rule over, your logic and reasoning. Now, Lovett gives an illustration of a family having a picnic in an LA park. And a movie company's making a movie across the ravine. And he had a bear costume on. It's hot. And he saw the family had a picture of lemonade. So he went running over to see if they'd give him a drink of lemonade between the scenes. And when they saw him coming, they jumped up, began to scream and run over the table. Well, if they'd have just thought twice, they'd know he wasn't a real bear, up on all fours. But he forgot to throw his hood back. But once your imagination comes in, it rules what you're doing. So your imagination, your visualization, is stronger than your will. So you can will you're not going to do it. But if you visualize yourself not doing it, then that puts legs to it. So to me that's very helpful with the meaning of the verse, and not trying to make 1 Corinthians 10:13 as something that happens on the scene.
Yes.
It's something that happens by plan and design. And so I visualize myself doing it, I will do it. And I haven't studied this scientifically, but on this trip we made last week, we had a wrestling coach, and I talked to him about this a little bit, and he said, well, we teach sports visualization. He said, I go to a wrestling match, and if the other guy does this, I'll do that. So I know how I'm going to respond to every move he makes, everything he touches, I don't have to think, I just memorize what I want to do, visualize in advance. And he said all branches of athletics teach sports visualization, they said, on that. So visualizing is the key, whether we do it or not. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And I hadn't thought about this, Jim, but I think of some statements in the New Testament, like set your mind, consider yourself. There's some of those phrases. Would those touch on this area of I need to not simply say no to sin, but then set my mind or plan ahead on very positively what to do?
Yeah, well, the stop doing it approach doesn't work. And that's generally the most help you get from somebody else. You ought to stop doing that. What does work is visualize a plan, step by step. And then when the temptation comes, carry out the plan. Like Amos, he said, now when that guy pours that glass of whiskey on, I want to walk right on by. So as I said, we don't have to restrict 1 Corinthians 13 to something that happens on the spot. At the point of temptation, it's a pre-planning process.
Yes. Jim, maybe Mark 7:21. Could you share a little bit of that with us? Jesus had spoken about from within, out of men and women's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, thefts, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, folly, and all these evils come from inside and make a person unclean.
Yes, I think that Mark 7 passage, is about the best summary there is of the kind of temptations that come. And I think his point is, I think Dr. Francis Schaeffer that first said this, he said, when desire and opportunity meet, there is sin. So what he's saying, in my estimation, this passage is, you're going to be confronted with these. And I think we work the other end. If you visualize yourself doing it, you will do it. Desire and opportunity.
Yes.
So we've got to visualize ourselves, and every one of these things is mentioned. When opportunity comes, I have an alternate plan.
Very good.
I just think about, I can't think of everything that's going to happen to me. Sometimes I don't think that far ahead. But I think of like in Ephesians 6, generally building your mind up through this shield of faith and the tools that God gives us to be ready. What are your thoughts on that in terms of maybe just not knowing what's coming, but to be ready in general?
Well, we were talking earlier about character, that when we take a verse of Scripture and have a conviction, God is saying that to me, then that conviction leads to a course of action. And I mentioned I can't remember what we did on the camera and what we didn't. But this guy I knew traveled quite a bit. And I said, how do you deal with temptation when you're overseas, in a strange town, and all that? And he said, not a problem, because I have resolved I will not be unfaithful to my wife. So that was a part of his character, his value system. And so he didn't get a second thought, well, I guess that's not it's quite the same thing as planning a way of escape, or consider he's dead, but then that was a conviction. So probably that needs to be worked in there, and I did mention that my vulnerable areas are where I don't have a conviction on that, but if I develop a conviction, well then I'd carry it out. So these two ideas seem to need to be married together somehow.
Yes. Yes.
But I'd suggest you try this and teach it. But really what he's saying in the verse is to visualize that you will not respond because I have something to which I will respond.
And this would be consistent with what Roger was saying out of Ephesians. There are things to put on. And so I need to prepare myself, maybe morning by morning, to visualize myself through the day, not simply not doing, but then also visualizing what I will do if confronted. So I have to take initiative. God lets me be proactive.
Yeah, well, Colorado Springs used to be the kind of the porno capital of the world. And pretty hard to go downtown without passing the shop, and where you park and so forth. So I just made a habit, I'm going to stay out of that part of town.
Yes.
Park someplace else or go to some other store.
Well, thank you, Jim.
That's kind of a short verse, but seeming like there's a real deep truth in it.